While leading a tour group in the mountains, I suddenly came across a lost boy. His face filled with panic, tears streaking down his cheeks. I took the boy's hand to help him find his mother, but the moment the woman appeared, I froze. Her face, every feature, was identical to that of my sister, Paige, who had died 10 years ago in a mountaineering accident. I thought I was seeing a ghost, yet she calmly smiled, introduced herself as Peyton Scott, and firmly stated she had never heard the name Paige. This is a story about a buried family secret, and the truth that came to light changed everything. My name is Jerome Turner, 33 years old, a tour guide with a passionate love for nature. I live among mountain trails, icy streams, and endless forests. That's where I feel truly alive, where I can hear my heartbeat blend with the sound of the wind. But deep inside, I carry a void, a wound that has never healed, carved into me 10 years ago when my sister Paige left this world forever. I still vividly remember that fateful day. I was 23, freshly graduated with a degree in tourism management, still buzzing with dreams of conquering every peak alongside my sister. Paige was 4 years older than me, but to me she wasn't just a sister. She was a guiding light, the one who inspired me to live fully for my passion. She was a renowned tour guide, with a radiant smile and the ability to make anyone feel safe on the most treacherous trails. She once told me, "Jerome, mountains aren't just rocks and trees. They're where we find ourselves." I believed her, every word. But then, one October afternoon, exactly 10 years ago, everything fell apart. I received a call from one of Paige's colleagues. His voice trembled over the phone. "Jerome, your sister. She had an accident on the mountain." I don't remember what I did next, only that my legs moved on their own, my heart pounding as if it would burst. When I reached the cliff, dusk was settling and the wind howled as if mourning in my place. The crowd was silent, their eyes avoiding mine. Then a stretcher covered with a white sheet was pulled up from the abyss. I screamed, tore the sheet away, and there she was. Paige. She lay motionless, her face pale, her brown hair matted with blood. I held her, calling her name until my voice gave out, but her hand, the one that once gripped mine during climbs, was now cold, devoid of warmth. They said she fell while trying to save a tourist. I don't remember how long I cried, only that in that moment half of my soul plummeted into the abyss with her. No one knew exactly what happened, only that she was gone, leaving me with an unspoken pain. Paige's funeral is a memory I never want to revisit, but it clings to me like a persistent nightmare. I stood before her altar, staring at her portrait, her radiant smile still so alive as if she had just stepped out and would soon return. Her ashes were placed in a simple little urn, surrounded by the white flowers she loved. My mother, her hair streaked with gray, clutched a handkerchief, crying until she had no tears left. My father was silent, his eyes lost in an endless void. I wanted to scream, to demand why she had left me, but all I could do was stand there, helpless, watching her fade into memory. In Paige's small room, I found a travel journal, her most precious keepsake. It was an old leather-bound notebook filled with accounts of her journeys, from the peaks she conquered to the stories she heard from tourists. Every page carried Paige's essence, her witty, passionate voice, as if she were telling the stories right in front of me. I carried that journal with me everywhere as a way to keep her close, to feel that she was still out there somewhere watching over me. Some nights I'd open the notebook, rereading her words, and tears would silently fall. "Jerome, if I'm ever not here anymore, you have to keep living. Keep climbing the mountains I never got to conquer," she had written. But how could I live fully when a part of my heart had died with her? My life went on like that, drifting between trips and memories of Paige. I thought I would forever carry that pain, forever hold on to her journal like a talisman. Until that fateful day, the day everything I believed in was turned upside down. The day I met Peyton Scott. 10 years after Paige's death, I was still a tour guide, wandering the mountain trails across states, from the majestic Smoky Mountains to the dense forests of the Appalachian Range. This job wasn't just a profession. It was my way of keeping Paige close. Each step on the rugged paths, each breath of the crisp mountain air made me feel as though she was out there somewhere watching over me. I often wondered, if she were still alive, would she be proud to see me carrying on our shared dream? But that question never found an answer, only leaving a cold void in my heart. I led groups of tourists through treacherous trails, from novices to seasoned adventurers. They loved me, calling me Smiling Jerome for my ability to make them laugh even when their legs ached and sweat poured like streams. I shared stories about the wilderness, near misses with getting lost or unexpected encounters with a deer in the morning mist. But no one knew that every smile I forced was an effort to mask my pain. On some nights when the group had fallen asleep in their tents, I sat by the campfire, opening Paige's journal, flipping through pages filled with her words. Jerome, don't be afraid. The mountains will teach you how to stand strong. I read, and silent tears fell, blending into the flickering firelight. My family now consists only of my parents, living in a small town far from the city, where endless fields of wheat stretch out. After Paige's death, things between us became strained. I still called home, still sent money for them to fix the roof or buy medicine, but our conversations were brief, filled with awkward silences. My mother would ask if I was eating enough, sleeping enough, but her eyes during video calls were always heavy, as if she wanted to say something but held back. My father was even more reserved, nodding or changing the subject whenever I mentioned Paige. I live alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of town, where I can hear the wind rustling through the trees outside my window. The apartment is sparsely furnished, a bed, an old wooden table, and a bookshelf crammed with books about travel and nature. On the table, I keep Paige's journal next to a photo of her and me on Blue Ridge Mountain. In the picture, she's beaming, her arm around my shoulder while I grin sheepishly, my hair tousled by the wind. That was the last time we climbed together before she was gone. Every time I look at the photo, a sharp pain stabs my chest, but I can't bring myself to put it away. It's all I have left of her. My work keeps me busy, often taking me to the mountains for weeks at a time, leaving little room to think about anything else. But when I return, when night falls and the city grows quiet, loneliness creeps in, gnawing at me bit by bit. I wonder if this life has any meaning when the person I loved most is no longer here. I've tried to fill the void with trips, with jokes shared with tourists, but it's all temporary. Paige's journal is the only thing that anchors me, like a thread connecting me to her, to the days when I still felt whole. That day, I was leading a group of tourists up the Smoky Range, one of my favorite routes. The sky was clear blue, the sun shone brightly, and the breeze carried the faint scent of pine needles. My group consisted of 10 people, from a young couple to a group of friends who loved photographing landscapes. I walked at the back, checking safety ropes while recounting the time I was nearly attacked by a hawk that thought I was stealing its nest. The group burst into laughter, and for a moment I felt a lightness in my heart, fleeting as it was. But that moment didn't last. When we stopped at a clearing for lunch, I heard soft crying coming from some nearby bushes. The sobs were faint, intermittent, like those of a child trying to hold back tears. I signaled for the group to continue resting and walked toward the sound, a twinge of worry in my chest. "Is someone there?" I called out gently, careful not to startle anyone. As I parted the branches, I saw a boy about 8 years old curled up on the ground, his eyes red and tears streaming down his cheeks. He wore a green jacket, his hair tousled by the wind, and he looked so frightened it was heartbreaking. When he looked up, his eyes met mine, and for a moment my heart skipped a beat. There was something in those eyes, a clear, pure light, a faint trace of familiarity in his features, that vaguely reminded me of Paige. It wasn't an obvious resemblance, not her exact face, but an indescribable feeling, as if her radiant smile had once flickered in this boy's gaze. It was fleeting, like a breeze skimming across a lake, but enough to make my chest ache, memories of her crashing over me like a wave. I blinked, trying to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just an illusion born of my lingering grief. "Hey, are you okay? What's your name?" I knelt down, speaking in the warmest tone I could muster, the way Paige used to comfort lost children on her trips. The boy looked up, his wide eyes glinting with a mix of hope and fear. I'm Billy," he sobbed, wiping his tears with his sleeve. "I lost my mom." "Don't worry, Billy," I said, smiling. "I'm Jerome, a guide here. I'll help you find your mom, okay?" Billy nodded, his lips pressed tightly together, but his eyes were less panicked now. I took his hand, small and cold, and led him along the trail, telling stories to calm him down. "You know, once I chased a rabbit in the forest and got separated from my group. Lucky for me, I knew how to navigate by the stars to find my way back." Billy let out a clear, bright laugh and started talking about his mom, a woman named Peyton who loved hiking but was a bit strict when he ran off. The boy talked a lot, from the squirrel he chased that led him astray to how delicious his mom's cookies were. I listened, relieved to see him gradually forget his fear. We headed toward the meeting point, a wide clearing where groups often gathered before descending the mountain. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees, casting a soft golden glow over the trail. A chilly autumn breeze blew through, prompting me to pull up the collar of my jacket. I looked around, hoping to find Billy's group, and then I heard an anxious voice calling from a distance. "Billy? Where are you? Billy?" A woman's voice filled with panic. I held Billy's hand tighter and quickened our pace toward the sound. As we emerged from the trail, I saw her. She stood there, slender, with long brown hair cascading over her shoulders, her deep blue eyes sparkling in the sunlight. She wore a red jacket and mud-caked hiking boots, her face tense with worry. When she looked up and our eyes met, time seemed to stop. My heart pounded, blood rushed to my ears, and my mind spun. That face, those eyes, that worried smile was Paige, identical in every detail, from the way she tilted her head to the light shimmering in her eyes. It was as if my sister, who left this world 10 years ago, was standing right in front of me, so vividly alive that it made my heart ache. "Paige," I blurted out, my voice trembling, unable to control myself. Billy ran to hug his mother, but I stood frozen, my feet rooted to the ground. The woman held Billy tightly, checking him for injuries, then looked up at me. Her brows furrowed, a mix of confusion and wariness in her expression. "I'm sorry, what did you just call me?" she asked, her voice soft but with a hint of coldness, as if trying to keep her distance. I shook my head, struggling to regain my composure, but my hands trembled, and the backpack on my shoulders felt like it was carrying the weight of the world. I'm sorry. You look like someone I used to know. You're Billy's mom, right?" She nodded, smiling at Billy before turning back to me. "Yes, I'm Peyton Scott. Thank you for finding my son. I was so worried." Her voice softened, though it still carried a trace of reserve. She brushed Billy's hair, checking him again, then took his hand, preparing to leave. I wanted to scream, to hold her back, to ask the 1,000 questions exploding in my mind. Peyton Scott. Her name rang like a bell, but I couldn't focus on her words. All I could see was Paige's face, the sister I lost, the sister I cried for until I had no tears left on the night of her funeral. I stood there, in the middle of the mountains, feeling as if the world had collapsed all over again. But I knew I couldn't let her walk away without finding out more. "Wait," I called out, my voice trembling slightly. Can I have your contact information? I mean, to send you some photos of Billy from today. He was very brave." I tried to come up with a reasonable excuse, though deep down, I just wanted to keep her there a little longer, to look one more time at that face so painfully reminiscent of Paige. Peyton Scott paused, turning to look at me. The afternoon sunlight caught her brown hair, making it glow like a halo. Those deep blue eyes, identical to Paige's, scanned me with a hint of suspicion, but then she gave a faint, polite but distant smile. "All right," she said softly, then recited her phone number. I hurriedly noted it down, my hands shaking so much I nearly dropped the phone. "Thank you again, Jerome," she said, then took Billy's hand and led him away. The figures of mother and son gradually disappeared down the trail, blending into the fiery red sunset. I stood there alone in the mountains, the cold wind blowing past, carrying dry leaves as if whispering secrets I couldn't yet grasp. When I returned to my apartment that night, I couldn't sleep. My small room, usually peaceful with the sound of wind slipping through the window, now felt suffocating like a prison. I sat at the table, opened Paige's diary, and flipped to the last page she wrote. "Jerome, if one day I'm no longer here, remember that you're never alone." But tonight, those words couldn't comfort me. Peyton Scott's face haunted me like a living ghost. I took out an old photo of Paige and placed it next to my phone, the two faces, so eerily similar, making my heart pound with both hope and fear. This couldn't be a coincidence. It couldn't. I turned on the desk lamp and pulled a stack of old photos from the drawer, pictures of Paige on her hiking trips, her radiant smile, her eyes sparkling like the sky. I compared every feature of her face to my memory of Peyton today. The way she tilted her head when she spoke, the light in her eyes when she looked at Billy, even her gentle but firm voice, all of it was so achingly like Paige. But Peyton said she'd never heard of the name Paige. Was she hiding something, or did she truly not know? The thought sent a shiver through me. I couldn't let this pass as a random encounter. That night I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, my mind swirling with 1,000 questions. Who was Peyton Scott? Why did she look so much like Paige? Was I imagining things, or was there a buried truth? Paige's diary lay on the table as if challenging me to find answers. I knew I couldn't keep living with this doubt. I had to find out, and the only people who could give me clues were my parents. The next morning, pale sunlight filtered through the curtains, but I felt no warmth. I hadn't slept a wink, my mind consumed by Peyton Scott's face and unanswered questions. Paige's diary lay on the table, silently urging me to act. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I grabbed my phone, took a deep breath, and dialed home. Mom answered after 2 rings, her voice gentle but tinged with worry, as if she sensed this wasn't a casual call. "Jerome, are you okay? You haven't called this early in a while," she said, trying to sound cheerful, but I could hear the tension underneath. "Mom, Dad, I need to see you both," I said, my voice harder than I intended, as if the doubt in my heart was forcing the words out. "There's something I need to ask about. About Paige, and someone I met yesterday." There was a long silence on the other end. I heard Mom take a sharp breath, as if holding something back. "Jerome, what's got you so worked up?" She gave a small laugh. "Why don't we wait until the weekend? I'll make your favorite soup and we can all sit down and talk." "No, Mom." I cut her off, my voice sharper, though my heart was pounding. "I can't wait. I'm coming over soon." The fire of doubt in me flared, burning away any remaining patience. "I know you're hiding something about Paige. I need the truth." Another silence, longer and heavier. I heard Mom whisper something, likely to Dad, but I couldn't make it out. Then Dad spoke, his voice low and measured, as if weighing every word. "Jerome, take it easy. Come home and we'll talk. Don't jump to conclusions." His words felt like a wall holding me back, but his forced calm only convinced me more. They were hiding something. I hung up without waiting for more. My heart was heavy, as if I'd just thrown myself into a storm with no idea where it would lead. I didn't know what I was about to face, but Peyton Scott's face, so identical to Paige's, and the secret I suspected my parents were keeping burned in me like a smoldering flame, consuming every thought. I packed a few things, stuffed Paige's diary into my backpack, and drove to my parents' house, filled with unease but brimming with determination. The drive was long and exhausting, but I barely noticed. The scenery outside, golden wheat fields, solitary houses, passed like a faded film. In my mind, there was only Peyton and Paige, their faces overlapping, blurring the line between reality and memory. When I pulled up in front of my parents' old house, I took a deep breath, trying to suppress the wave of emotions rising within me. The house was the same as ever, with its weathered wooden fence and the small flower garden Mom tended. But today, it felt alien, as if it were hiding a terrible secret. My parents greeted me at the door. Mom hugged me tightly, but her eyes were full of worry. Dad stood behind her, arms crossed, his gaze avoiding mine. "You came so suddenly? Is something serious going on?" Mom asked, her voice trembling. I didn't beat around the bush. I pulled out Paige's photo. "I met someone yesterday," I said, my voice calm but cold. "Her name is Peyton Scott. She looks exactly like Paige, so much so that I thought I was seeing her come back to life." I looked straight into Mom's eyes, then Dad's. "What do you know about this? Is there something about Paige you've never told me?" The air in the room grew thick. Mom lowered her head, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. Dad turned away, clearing his throat. "Come inside and we'll talk," he said. We sat around the kitchen table. The atmosphere was so tense it felt like an interrogation. My heart pounded, sensing I was about to face a real storm. "Jerome, don't dig up the past," Dad said, his voice hoarse. "Paige has been gone for 10 years, you know that. She can't come back. Don't torment yourself with crazy ideas." "No." I stood up, slamming my hand on the table, making the teacup rattle. "I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. Peyton Scott doesn't just look like Paige. She is Paige, or she's connected to her. What are you hiding from me? Tell me." Mom burst into tears, her frail shoulders shaking. Dad turned to look at me, his eyes filled with deep pain, but he still tried to maintain his composure. "Jerome, sit down," he said, his voice low and trembling. "There's something... It's time we told you the truth." I sat down, my heart pounding, feeling as if the entire world was shrinking to this small kitchen table. Mom gripped Dad's hand, as if drawing strength, then began to speak, her voice choked with emotion. "Jerome, you have to understand. Back then we had no choice. We were so poor, drowning in debt. When I was pregnant with Paige, and another child..." My blood ran cold. "Another child?" I repeated, my voice faltering. "What do you mean?" Dad took over, his voice sounding strangled. "Paige had a twin sister, Jerome, but we couldn't keep both. The hospital, the debts, we were about to lose everything. Someone offered to adopt one of them and they paid us. We had no choice. If we hadn't done it, our whole family would have starved." I shot to my feet, the chair crashing behind me. "What did you do?" I shouted, my voice breaking, tears welling up without me realizing. "You sold your own child. You sold Paige's sister. You threw away your own flesh and blood from the cradle." I slammed my hand on the table, the teacup falling to the floor, shattering into pieces just like my heart at that moment. Mom sobbed, covering her face. "Jerome, we didn't want to. We thought the child would have a better life. We didn't know." She couldn't finish, collapsing into Dad's arms, the two of them like shadows in the dim kitchen light. I stepped back, feeling the floor crumble beneath me. Peyton Scott. She was Paige's twin sister. My sister didn't just die in an accident. She lost a part of her blood from the moment she was born. I looked at my parents, people I had once loved and trusted, but now they were strangers. Rage, pain, and pity swirled within me, a storm with no escape. I turned and walked out of the house, saying nothing more. Mom's cries followed me, but I didn't look back. Back at my apartment, I couldn't sleep. I sat up all night, flipping through Paige's diary, searching for any trace of a sister she never knew existed. But there was nothing. Only pages filled with her passionate words about the mountains, her dreams, and me. I clutched the diary, tears falling onto the paper, soaking the ink. "Paige," I whispered, "did you know? You had a sister, and now I've found her. But who was Peyton Scott? Did she know anything about Paige, about our family, or about the tragedy that separated the two sisters from birth?" The question burned like a fire, consuming every thought, making it impossible to stay still. I had to find the truth, not just for myself, but for Paige, for the sister who lived and died for her passion, never knowing she had a twin. I picked up my phone, staring at Peyton's number, my finger hovering over the screen but too afraid to call. How could I face her and tell her she was part of my family when she herself claimed she'd never heard of Paige? No. I needed proof. Solid pieces of the puzzle before stepping into that confrontation. The next morning I woke early, my eyes ringed with dark circles but my mind sharper than ever. I decided to start where it all began, the hospital where Paige and her twin sister were born. I rummaged through old documents I'd taken from my parents' house the day before. Among them I found Paige's faded birth certificate, clearly stating her date of birth and the hospital's name, St. Mary's, a small hospital in my hometown. There was nothing about a twin sister, but I knew this was my only starting point. I drove to St. Mary's, a 2-hour journey from my apartment. On the way, I didn't play music, letting the sound of the wind through the car window keep me company. The scenery outside, golden wheat fields, faint hills, passed like a faded film, but my mind was focused on one thing: the truth about Peyton. When I arrived at the hospital, my heart beat faster. The old building, with its white paint yellowed by time, still carried the solemn air of a place that held both joy and tragedy. I approached the reception desk, trying to stay calm. A middle-aged woman with glasses looked at me curiously. "I'd like to see birth records from over 30 years ago," I said, keeping my voice gentle but unable to hide my urgency. "I'm looking for information about my sister, and possibly another child born on the same day." The woman frowned, adjusting her glasses. "Records that old are often incomplete, young man. Do you have specific details? Name? Date of birth?" I handed her Paige's birth certificate, explaining that I needed to check if there were any records of a twin birth on that day. She nodded, but her eyes remained skeptical. "I'll check, but don't get your hopes up. Many records from that time have been destroyed or lost." I waited in the hallway, sitting on a hard plastic chair, clutching my backpack with Paige's diary inside. Each minute felt like a century. Finally, the woman returned, shaking her head. "Nothing, I'm afraid. The records from that day were cleaned out long ago. They might have been destroyed per retention policies." It felt like a bucket of cold water had been dumped on me, but I didn't give up. "Is there anyone here who worked back then? A doctor, a nurse, anyone?" She thought for a moment, then pointed down the hallway. "Helen, a retired nurse, sometimes stops by to visit friends. She worked in the maternity ward for over 40 years. She might know something. She's here today, having coffee in the cafeteria." I hurried to the cafeteria, my heart pounding. Helen was an elderly woman with neatly tied silver hair and kind but sharp eyes. I introduced myself, briefly explaining about Paige and why I was there. When I mentioned Paige's birth date, she froze, a spark of recognition in her eyes. "I remember that day," she said slowly, her voice low. "2 baby girls were born, identical as 2 drops of water. But the strange thing was, one was taken away quickly that same night. No one explained why, but I saw the mother, Mrs. Turner, right? Crying a lot. I think she didn't want to let the baby go." Helen's words stabbed my heart like a knife. I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. "Taken where? Who took the baby?" I asked, my voice trembling. She shook her head. "I don't know. Back then there were sensitive cases. Some children were adopted through unofficial channels. I don't want to speculate, but your family might have been in great difficulty." She looked at me with sympathy. "I'm sorry, young man." That's all I remember. I felt both hope and despair. Helen's words confirmed what my parents had said. Paige had a twin sister and she was taken away. But who took her, and why? I thanked her and left the hospital, my mind reeling. I needed more clues, and the next step was to find adoption records. I contacted an old friend, Mike, who worked at the local administrative office. I gave him a brief version of the story, avoiding family details, saying only that I was looking for information on an adoption from over 30 years ago. Mike agreed to help, but warned that adoption records were tightly sealed. "I'll try to dig, but you need specific dates and at least one name," he said. I gave him Paige's birth date and the name Peyton Scott, hoping it was the right lead. A few days later, Mike called back. Jerome, I found something. There's an adoption record from St. Mary's, matching the date you gave. The child was adopted by a couple named Richard and Evelyn Scott. They were wealthy, lived in an upscale neighborhood, but kept to themselves. The child's name isn't listed, just female infant. Want me to dig deeper? My heart raced. Peyton Scott. The name couldn't be a coincidence. Dig deeper, Mike, I said urgently. I need everything about them. While waiting, I couldn't sit still. I went online searching for information about Richard and Evelyn Scott. They were a successful couple, owners of a real estate company, but rarely appeared publicly. I found an old article mentioning they adopted a baby girl over 30 years ago, but no specific details. I decided to track down another witness, a former neighbor of the Scotts. After looking up their address, I drove to an affluent neighborhood where large houses hid behind lush green trees. I knocked on the door of Mrs. Margaret, an elderly woman who had lived next to the Scotts for decades. She greeted me with curiosity, but when I mentioned Peyton, she nodded slowly. Peyton, that poor girl, she said, her voice heavy with sadness. As a child, she was rarely allowed out. I saw her crying on the porch once, but when I asked, her parents said she was being punished for misbehaving. I noticed bruises on her arm once, but Evelyn said she fell while playing. Margaret's words sent a chill through me. Peyton didn't have the happy childhood my parents had hoped for. Instead, she lived under control, possibly even abuse. Anger surged within me, not just toward the Scotts, but toward my parents who had handed their child to such a family. I continued my search, contacting Peyton's old elementary school teacher, Mrs. Clara, through an alumni group. Clara remembered Peyton clearly. She was very bright but quiet, she said over the phone. I saw bruises on her wrist once, but she always said she fell during gym. I reported it to the school, but her parents had influence, so no one dared act. Finally, through Mike, I obtained Peyton's old hospital records. She had been admitted multiple times for household accidents, broken arms, bruises, with an unusual frequency. Each piece I uncovered pointed to a painful truth. Peyton wasn't just separated from her biological family. She grew up in a home filled with darkness. My parents thought they were giving her a better life, but in reality they had pushed her into a nightmare. I sat in my apartment clutching Paige's diary, my heart heavy. Peyton was her sister, but she had lived an entirely different life, full of pain. I had to meet her to tell her the truth, but how could I make her believe? And how could I face the pain that both Paige and Peyton were victims of a tragedy I was only beginning to understand? The days that followed left me feeling like a hollow shell. Every morning I woke up to Peyton's face in my mind, overlapping with memories of Paige, blurring the line between reality and illusion. Paige's diary sat on the table, a constant reminder that I couldn't stop. I had to tell Peyton the truth, not just for her, but for Paige, for the unspoken promise that I wouldn't let the sisters remain separated by secrets forever. But how do you tell a stranger that her entire life might be a lie? I knew this meeting wouldn't be easy, but I had no other choice. I picked up my phone, opened Peyton's number, and hovered my finger over the screen dozens of times before mustering the courage to call. When her voice came through, gentle, polite, but tinged with caution, my heart pounded. "Hello, Peyton. This is Jerome, the one who found Billy on the mountain the other day," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can we meet to talk? There are some important things I need to share." She was silent for a moment, and I could sense her hesitation through the line. "About what, Jerome?" she asked, her voice slightly tense. I didn't want to reveal too much over the phone, fearing she'd refuse. "About Billy and some things related to the past. I promise it won't take much of your time." After another pause, she agreed, her voice still guarded. "All right, tomorrow afternoon at Blue Ridge Cafe near the park. I'll bring Billy." I hung up, feeling like I'd just climbed a mountain, but I knew the real mountain lay ahead. I spent the night preparing, gathering everything I had. Paige's birth certificate, Helen's account, the adoption records from Mike, and a few old photos of Paige. I carefully arranged them in a small folder as if preparing for a trial. But this wasn't a courtroom. It was a confrontation with the truth, with a woman who might not want to hear what I had to say. The next afternoon, I arrived at Blue Ridge Cafe earlier than planned. The cafe was tucked along a tree-lined street with large glass windows overlooking a lush park. I chose a corner table where sunlight streamed through, illuminating specks of dust floating in the air. I placed the folder on the table, clutching Paige's diary in my backpack like a talisman. Every time the door's bell chimed, my heart skipped a beat, until Peyton walked in holding Billy's hand. She looked more like Paige than ever. A light green jacket, her brown hair loosely tied, and those deep blue eyes sparkling in the light. Billy ran over, grinning brightly, hugging me like an old friend. "Uncle Jerome, tell me the rabbit story again," he chirped, and I smiled, but my eyes stayed on Peyton. She sat down across from me, setting her bag aside, her gaze probing. "Billy, go play over there for a bit while Mommy talks to Uncle Jerome," she said, pointing to a corner of the cafe with toys for kids. Billy nodded and scampered off, leaving Peyton and me in a tense silence. "Peyton," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "I know this might sound unbelievable, but I have to tell you, you're the twin sister of my sister, Paige Turner." Peyton froze, her brows knitting tightly. She gave a small, forced laugh, defensive. "Jerome, I think you're mistaken. I don't have a sister, and I've never heard of Paige Turner. Are you joking?" Her voice was light, but I could hear the strain, as if she was trying to maintain a protective wall. I took a deep breath, summoning all my courage. "I'm not joking. I know it sounds crazy, but I have proof." I opened the folder, pulling out Paige's birth certificate and placing it in front of her. "This is my sister's birth certificate, born October 15th at St. Mary's Hospital." I spoke to a nurse there, Helen. She remembers a twin birth that day. One baby was kept, Paige. The other was taken away that night. Peyton looked at the paper but didn't touch it. Her face paled, her eyes wavering. "This is just a piece of paper. It doesn't prove anything," she said, her voice rising as if trying to convince herself. "Yes, I was adopted, but my parents, Richard and Evelyn Scott, are the only family I know." "What are you trying to do? Scare me?" Anger surged within me, not at Peyton, but at the bitter truth we were both facing. "Peyton, listen to me," I said, my voice firmer. "I don't want to scare you. But you deserve the truth. Our biological parents gave you up because of poverty. They thought you'd have a better life, but they were wrong. I've looked into your adoptive parents. The bruises on your arms as a child, the hospital visits for household accidents. You can't tell me that was normal." Peyton shot to her feet, her chair tipping back, drawing glances from a few people in the cafe. "Enough!" she shouted, her voice breaking, tears glistening in her eyes. "Who are you to dig into my life? You think you know anything about me? I'm not anyone's sister." She raised her hand as if to slap me, but stopped, her hand trembling in midair. Billy looked over from the corner, his eyes worried, but Peyton didn't notice. She turned to leave. "Peyton, wait!" I stood, gently grabbing her arm, not hard, but enough to make her pause. "Look at this." I pulled out a photo of Paige taken at the top of Blue Ridge, her smile radiant like sunlight. I placed it next to a photo I'd printed that morning of Peyton and Billy from the mountain. "Look, Peyton. You can't deny it. You're identical to her." Peyton stared at the photos, and I saw her expression shift, from anger to confusion, then collapse. She sat down slowly, as if all strength had left her body. "No," she whispered, her trembling fingers touching Paige's photo. "It can't be. I don't... My parents said I was adopted, but they never mentioned a sister. They said I was an only child." I sat across from her, trying to keep my voice gentle. "Peyton, I'm sorry. I know this is painful, but you deserve the truth. Paige never knew you existed. She died 10 years ago in a climbing accident. She was the light of my life, and now that I've found you, I can't let you live in a lie." Peyton covered her face, tears streaming down onto the table, staining the photo. What? What are you saying?" she choked out. "My whole life I thought I knew who I was. Now you're telling me I had a twin sister?" Her voice broke as if the very thought was too much to bear. Billy ran over, hugging his mother, his voice trembling. "Mommy, what's wrong?" My heart felt like it was shattering. I wanted to hug Peyton, to tell her everything would be okay, but I knew it wasn't the time. "Peyton," I said, my voice hoarse, "I don't want to ruin your life. But you're Paige's sister, my family. I'll be here if you need me." Peyton didn't respond. She hugged Billy, stood and left the cafe, leaving Paige's photo on the table. I sat there watching her figure disappear through the glass door, feeling like I'd lost something all over again. But I knew this wasn't the end. Peyton might not accept the truth now, but the seed had been planted. And I wouldn't stop until she understood, until our family was pieced back together even just a little. Peyton turned away, the door slamming shut like a final verdict, and I knew she needed time to confront the truth. But I couldn't stop, not just for Peyton, for Paige, or for our family, but because secrets like this couldn't be allowed to remain buried. I had to do something, not with violence or revenge, but with truth, with justice. In the days that followed, I resumed my investigation, but this time with a larger goal. Not only to uncover the truth about Peyton, but also to expose the child trafficking ring that had torn her and her twin sister apart over 30 years ago. Nurse Helen's words from St. Mary's Hospital still echoed in my mind. Some children were adopted through unofficial channels. That phrase sent shivers down my spine. Peyton wasn't the only one. How many other children had been ripped from their families, handed to unworthy people, all for money? I couldn't let those responsible continue to walk free. I started with the old clues. Helen had mentioned a middleman who took Paige's twin sister away the night she was born. I returned to St. Mary's Hospital, hoping to find more information. This time I brought Paige's journal, not to read, but as a talisman, as if she were by my side, guiding me. At the hospital, I met Helen again in the cafeteria, where she was sipping a cup of tea. When I pressed her about the middleman, a flicker of unease crossed her eyes. "Young man, this isn't simple," she said, her voice low. "Back then, there was a group working with poor families. They promised a better life for the children, but in reality it was a network. I don't know specific names, but there was a lawyer who often came to the hospital, talking to struggling families. Helen couldn't recall his name, but she gave me a valuable lead. A retired doctor, Dr. Raymond Carter, who had worked in the maternity ward at the time. He's retired now, but you might find him in the next town over. He knows more than I do," she said. I thanked her, feeling as if I'd just touched a thread leading to the truth. I tracked down Dr. Carter's home, a small house with a garden full of daisies. He was a frail man with white hair, but his eyes were still sharp. When I told him about Paige and Peyton, he sighed, as if old memories were flooding back. "I remember that twin birth," he said, his voice heavy. "The Turner family was dirt poor. A man, claiming to be a lawyer named Harold Grayson, approached them. He said he'd find a good family for the baby and offered money to help them clear their debts. I urged them to think carefully, but they were too desperate." He paused, his gaze heavy. "I never imagined the girl would end up with the Scotts. I'd heard rumors about them, nothing good. The name Harold Grayson became my key. I contacted Mike, a friend who worked in an administrative office. "Mike, I need everything you can find on a lawyer named Harold Grayson, active about 30 years ago," I said urgently. Mike agreed to dig deeper, and a few days later he sent me a thin file. Grayson had been a lawyer specializing in adoptions, but his record was riddled with red flags. Many adoptions lacked legal documentation, and several adoptive families were linked to allegations of abuse. My blood boiled. This network hadn't just stolen Peyton, it had ruined the lives of countless other children. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I reached out to Sarah, an investigative journalist I'd met on a climbing trip years ago. Sarah was known for her exposés on scandals, and when I shared Peyton's story, she agreed to help. "Jerome, if this is a child trafficking ring, we need solid evidence," she said over the phone. "Send me everything you have and I'll start digging from my end." I sent Sarah everything: Helen's account, Mike's files, and Dr. Carter's information. Meanwhile, I kept searching for other witnesses. I contacted a nonprofit organization specializing in reuniting lost relatives, and they helped me access an old database of adoptions. I uncovered 3 more cases from St. Mary's Hospital, all linked to Harold Grayson. One was a woman named Laura, now in her 30s, who had been adopted by a wealthy but abusive family. When I met her, she spoke of a childhood filled with bruises and fear, eerily similar to Peyton's experience. "I always knew I didn't belong there," Laura said, her eyes red. "If you find who's behind this, make them pay." Sarah worked tirelessly. She dug into Grayson's past and found he was retired but still living in a small town a few hours away. She also uncovered old documents showing Grayson worked with a network of intermediaries, including hospital staff and adoptive families. "This wasn't just one lawyer," Sarah said when we met at a coffee shop. "It was a system, Jerome. They preyed on poor families, promising a bright future for the children, but really they were selling them to anyone who paid." After weeks of work, Sarah and I had enough evidence for an article. I provided Peyton's story without naming her to protect her privacy, and the other cases I'd found. After weeks of work, Sarah and I had enough evidence for an article. I provided Peyton's story without naming her to protect her privacy and the other cases I'd found. Sarah added legal documents, witness testimonies, and even a recorded conversation with a former employee of Grayson's who admitted to helping arrange illegal adoptions. The article, titled "Stolen Children: Secrets of St. Mary's Hospital," was published in a major newspaper. It sent shockwaves through the public. Victims' families spoke out, demanding a reinvestigation. Harold Grayson was summoned, and an official investigation was launched. I sat in my apartment, the glow of the screen illuminating my face. Sarah's article stared back at me. "Stolen Children: Secrets of St. Mary's Hospital." Justice had begun. Grayson was summoned, victims were speaking out, and an investigation was underway. But instead of joy, I felt a bleeding wound in my heart, both soothed and aching. I opened Paige's old journal. On its yellowed pages, her handwriting stood out. "Jerome, if I'm ever gone, do what's right," I whispered through tears. "Paige, I did it." But I knew this justice couldn't restore Peyton's or Laura's childhood, nor could it bring Paige back to me. I thought of Peyton, her eyes filled with anger and desperation. She was still grappling with the truth, and I couldn't abandon her. Paige's words echoed in my mind. "Mountains don't reject those who dare to walk." I understood that my journey had only just begun. Justice had been served. The people behind the child trafficking ring were paying the price, but for me that wasn't enough. Peyton was Paige's sister, my family, and I had to find a way to bring her back, no matter how thorny the path ahead. Paige's journal sat on my table, a reminder that I couldn't give up. The months that followed were a strange mix of hope and unease. I didn't contact Peyton right away, knowing she needed time to process the truth. Sarah's article had caused a storm, sparking discussions across newspapers and social media. More victims' families came forward, sharing their stories, and I felt a small comfort in knowing I'd helped break the wall of silence. But every night when my apartment sank into darkness, I opened Paige's journal, rereading her words, wondering if I could ever mend what had been shattered in our family. One March afternoon, as spring sunlight began filtering through the trees outside my window, my phone rang. Peyton's number flashed on the screen, making my heart pound. I took a deep breath, bracing for a cold rejection, but when I answered, her voice was softer than I expected. "Jerome," she said, hesitating, "I want to meet you. Just you, not our parents." I agreed immediately, a mix of hope and anxiety swirling inside me. We arranged to meet at a small park near her house where old oak trees cast cool shade and birds chirped merrily. When I arrived, Peyton was already there, sitting on a wooden bench with Billy playing on the swings nearby. She wore a light sweater, her brown hair falling loosely, and her green eyes, identical to Paige's, looked at me with a calm I hadn't seen before. I sat beside her, unsure how to begin. "I read the article," Peyton said, her voice low. "About the child trafficking ring, about what you and the journalist did. I don't know whether to thank you or be angry at you." She gave a faint smile, but this time it lacked bitterness. "I've been thinking a lot, Jerome. About Paige, about our parents, about everything you said. I'm not ready to forgive, but I want to understand." I nodded, a spark of hope igniting within me. "Peyton, I don't expect you to forgive right away. I just want you to know you're not alone. Paige, she would have loved you so much if she knew you existed." I pulled out Paige's journal, opening it to a page where she wrote about her dream of climbing mountains with me. "This is her," I said, my voice hoarse. "She lived for the mountains, for the journeys, and for the people she loved. I think she would have wanted me to find you, wanted us to be family." Peyton touched the journal, her fingers tracing the lines of Paige's writing, her eyes misting with tears. "She really was like me," she whispered. "I love the mountains too, though I'm not as good as she was. Once when I took Billy camping, I felt like someone was there guiding me." She looked up at me, and for the first time I saw a genuine smile, however small, on her lips. Billy ran over, hugging his mother, then looked at me with wide, curious eyes. "Uncle Jerome, Mom says you're family, right?" he asked, his voice clear and bright. I smiled, feeling as if a piece of Paige was alive again in Billy's gaze. "That's right, Billy," I said, ruffling his hair. "I'm your uncle." Peyton didn't say anything, but she squeezed Billy's hand tighter, and I knew she was slowly opening her heart. In the weeks that followed, we met more often. Peyton started calling me, asking about Paige, her trips, and the things she loved. I told her about the time Paige taught me how to tie a safety rope, how she sang folk songs by the campfire, and how her smile always shone like the sun. Each story was a thread, pulling Peyton closer to the family she'd never known. One day, Peyton called me, her voice soft but resolute. "Jerome, I want to meet our parents. My real parents. I'm not ready to forgive, but I want to hear what they have to say." My heart felt like it stopped. I arranged for our parents to meet Peyton at her place, not the cold mansion, but a cozy little coffee shop with a warmer atmosphere. My mother arrived with red-rimmed eyes, my father holding her hand, his gaze filled with hope but also fear. The meeting wasn't easy. Peyton sat across from our parents, her eyes still tinged with doubt, but she listened. My mother spoke of those desperate days, about how they had to choose between keeping both children and risking losing everything. Peyton listened, her hands trembling as she held her coffee cup. "I can't call you Mom and Dad yet," she said, her voice low but sincere. "But I'll try to understand. For Paige, for Billy." She glanced at Billy, who was scribbling on a piece of paper, and smiled. I knew it was a start. The following autumn, I suggested we all go to the Smoky Mountains where Paige had died. Peyton agreed, bringing Billy, and our parents came too, though they walked slowly as if carrying a lifetime of regret. We stood on the cliff where Paige had fallen, the cold wind carrying the faint scent of pine. Peyton held a bouquet of white flowers, Paige's favorite, and released them into the abyss. The petals danced in the wind, like fragments of memories blending into the air. "Paige," Peyton whispered, her voice mingling with the breeze. "I've finally come home." I stood beside her, tears rolling down my cheeks, but this time they were tears of happiness. Billy held my hand. My mother hugged my father, and we stood there under the blazing red sunset, feeling as if Paige was somewhere smiling at us. Our story doesn't end with a perfect family reunion embrace. Peyton still needs time to forgive. Our parents still carry the pain of the past, and I still live with the void Paige left behind. But as we looked at the sunset, I knew that this family, though fractured, had found each other. And for me, that was enough. 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 That was enough.